Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Radical Thursdays. Nourish My Soul is proud to bring to you part two of the series of the conversation that Bella and Kenya had with Evelyn from Herspective. At the time of the recording, they didn't realize how relevant this conversation was going to be. It has taken on a new level of meaning and understanding and importance. I hope that you have listened to the first half and shared that in your circles. And I hope you do the same with this one. This episode, part two, I found to be even more impactful than the first one. And it is a difficult conversation. It is an adult conversation, so I recommend that you put headphones in if you have little ears around. But I wouldn't put off listening to it because it is really, really important that we have these conversations. And I really hope that men are tuning into this and they are learning something and they're keeping their ears and hearts open to this conversation and participate in it, because that's what needs to happen in order for a change to occur. We are deeply devastated by the events that took place in Georgia. However, we are not surprised in the least bit because this is our culture. We are responsible for having created this culture, and we are equally responsible for dismantling it. And that's going to take everybody, especially those holding the power. So if that is you, if you hold power in any of the groups, if you are male, if you are white, please don't overlook any of the oppression that you encounter. Little microaggressions grow into big acts of violence. They compound when we turn away and we don't stop it in its tracks. So I beg of you to please take this conversation seriously and to start doing the work. If you have questions, and please ask questions, that's how we are going to move forward. I am always available to have the conversation. I'm sure Bella and Kenya, in their limited availability, would be open to having the conversation with you. And Evelyn, I know, has extended that offer as well. So as long as you are doing it from the standpoint of wanting to improve and do better and not to diminish or belittle the conversation, please, we extend that opportunity to you. And that can also take place on our social media to discuss this topic and this conversation that you are about to listen to. So I don't want to hold you up anymore. I hope you enjoy this episode and you take it seriously and move forward from there. And again, please share this with others. Thank you.
So there has obviously, this is something that Kenny and I talked about portrayal of women throughout history and how it's influenced kind of what we're going to talk about after this present day. So, for example, something that I thought of was in literature, especially young adult literature, and the storylines, you'll see, even if it's like a female main character, you'll see the female main character be kind of more dainty and like they'll portray her in a way that she can't stand up for herself, like they'll portray it indirectly. And there's always this guy in the storyline that's kind of like the bad boy or like the tough guy in the situation that ends up being, the love interest or what have you, that he treats, and you can see in the storylines always, women like absolute shit. Plain and simple. There's no like, oh, but he's so sweet with her. No, he'll even treat her like shit in the story. And then, but said they, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I just like love you so much, and I'm here to protect you from other people. And they'll portray him in a way that he's the protector out of the two, and have her be the one to help him mend all his emotional trauma, and that's her responsibility, and to make him a better person and mend that and be the emotional protector, whereas he's the quote unquote physical protector in this scenario, and how that kind of reinforces the mindset and young girls, like, and maybe boys even, that's what I need to be to get a girl, or that's what I like need to look for to survive, or to live. I need to find that protector, that physical protector against everyone else in the world. I can't be that myself. And then you also
Wait, hold
mentioned
on.
one of your TikToks.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about how, like, the mindset, like, Evelyn, I don't know if you know about the Enneagram.
What is it called?
The Enneagram.
Personality types.
Okay, so a little background information. For those of you who don't know, I am obsessed with Enneagram tests. I take them all the time, and I make all my friends and family take them. But there's this one that is like, it's like your overall personality type, and it's a number system based on 1 through 9, and it talks about your personality and like the way that you view the world and the way you treat people based on the way that like you grew up. And so I was thinking, Bella, as you're talking about, like, kind of like the savior mentality, like, I know that for my type, I'm a type 2. That's literally everything. It's like, no, I need to, like, they need to rely on me. I need to be the most reliable. I care. And as you're talking, I was like, I would be curious to see the trends based on the type number with gender, because I wouldn't be surprised if the heart triad, so 2, 4, 6, is more female based, and then the more like exploratory or dominating traits lie more in men.
Well,
That's
first
just
of all,
think about that.
just for everyone in the everyone in the audience, first of all, personality traits and Enneagram is technically, scientifically not valid. Just to point that out there, they have several ways that it makes sense and it could be correct.
It's
but
trend.
From
It
a
shows
scientific
trend.
and research standpoint, it is technically not like valid or validified rather. So don't put all your eggs in the basket, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That being said, the kind of savior mentality of, oh, I have to save him or whatever. Anyway, it's interesting to see how that's kind of perpetrated in these young adult novels towards young girls or young men on what to look for, and then how it can lead to looking out and searching for relationships that may end up being toxic and causing, emotional trauma or what have you. And also kind of continuing on the cycle for men not to recognize, whoa, like I need to also be there for her emotionally. And if I have these problems, it may be too heavy to keep pushing on her. Maybe I need to go to therapy, and recognizing that that's not your only outlet in life to talk about your emotions. Like it shouldn't be. But those expectations come from, the patriarchy and stuff like that. And then I was also saying to Kenya earlier that you can kind of see this outside of that. So in the Bible, Kenya's Christian and I'm Catholic, so this is why we kind of sometimes get into little biblical talks. First story, Adam and Eve, the whole, she ate, I believe it was like an apple, if I remember correctly. That was, and for reference, I'm not talking about this in terms of like the biblical messaging behind it and like, resisting bad or whatever temptations. I'm talking about this from a simple, how it was portrayed from a gender perspective, and how, God and Adam said, don't eat the apple, like, and then just left it at that kind of situation, like as if their word and men's word is final and like it should never be questioned. And then she ate the apple because why wouldn't she? It's an apple. She's hungry. It looks good. She's her own person. Why not? And then they were like, oh my God, like that's evil. Like you shouldn't do that. Like in such a negative kind of like symbolism. And this is again talking from a gender perspective and not from a biblical like messaging standpoint. But it's interesting to see in different realms how it's been portrayed. And then again, in the movie industry and culture, if you guys don't know, there's like a male gaze and there's a female gaze, which is something I recently learned about through TikTok. I have been learning a lot about things that I don't really typically think about through TikTok. But basically, a male gaze is kind of seen as, this is the best example I can give you. A male gaze can be seen as, you can see in Transformers. I've never actually watched the movie. I've seen clippets of it, so preface that. But, you know, the guys are kind of macho, got big muscles. They focus on like appearance a little more. You see, what is it, Megan Fox? Oh,
He was in wasn't Megan Fox in Fast and Furious?
Or who was the, oh, it's Megan Fox or something like that. Who's the girl that's dating Machine Gun Kelly again? I think it's Megan Fox, yeah. It's a girl dating, anyway, where it's like a short little shirt, like low-rise jeans, like boobs, like in a push-up bra and everything, like, and shown in a very like kind of sexual manner on both parts, and showing these characters in that way, even though, you know, she's a badass in that movie, like she's kicking butt. And they're not really, the gaze, that's how you can see kind of the male gaze is focused not on that, but kind of on the sexual side of both how you see yourself as a male and how you see yourself as how you see female. And you can see that kind of in the way and director. So that was directed by a male director, which is why you were able to see the male gaze pretty predominantly, versus the female gaze, which is what we kind of generally look at more so. You can see this kind of in Pride and Prejudice. I don't know if you watched it or not, with Keira Knightley, when after Darcy walks her into the carriage and helps her up, she looks downward at his hand, and it shows the hand like kind of in a fist and then releasing, as if like, you know, it's kind of in burn, or, you know, what I've never been in that position where I've been in love, so I don't know how that feels, but that's what I would imagine. But it shows kind of, that's a female gaze. Or into the first To All the Boys I've Loved Before movie, which was directed by a female as well. You're able to see a lot of the female gaze versus the next two, which are directed by male. So that's kind of a little tidbit on how you've been able to see portrayals of women versus men throughout history based on gaze, if you didn't know that. So that kind of also plays into effect, more so for men, the patriarchy influences their gaze more so than females. But just a little example. Look out for it. Look at who's directing, and kind of look for those little things to see what it's kind of telling you to look for in life, and what you should be, what your expectations and your, you know, kind of things, and how it influences you. I don't know if any of you guys wanted to say that before we got into what Kenya wanted to get into, but yeah, just a little quick tidbit.
Yeah, those are all really good points. I think, yeah, and I think what I would want to add, if any, I think the notion that the end, a man is not the end to your suffering, right? He's not gonna put an end to your suffering, right? But and yet that's how a lot of romance movies, or not even romance movies, just a lot of movies direct women to think, right? So like, here is an abused woman, like who is getting abused and mistreated, and then she goes on to this like self-love journey, and then she gets married to a really good guy, right? Well, I would rather see a movie where like she gets out of that abusive relationship and is happy and accomplished something for herself.
Yeah,
right?
they're not
Think
our
of that movie, oh my goodness, directed by, or no, the movie it was self-made. It was on Netflix.
Okay.
Do you know what is her name? The actress, Octavia Spencer, was the lead actress, and she built a company for herself. It was like a hair care company, and she got into a really abusive relationship, and he ended up just like beating her up basically, and like just using her for her money. And she ended up walking away, and she ended up living a successful life, and she didn't need another guy. And it was just so refreshing to see that, like,
Yeah.
she's chilling, she's saving all of her money, like, yeah.
You need more movies like that,
Yeah.
right? This notion that female singlehood represents something broken and
Mm-hmm.
incomplete, that's also in the way of a lot of young women trying to accomplish their goals and realize their full potential, because by the time you're like 25, oh my god, like if you're freaking out, right, thinking like, oh my god, if I don't get married and don't have kids, like I'm not going to fit in and people are going to judge me, well then, you know, you're probably going to put all your eggs in, you know, in the dating basket.
You might find yourself very unhappy if you jump too quickly and then
Yep.
end up fighting or getting a divorce later on, which
Yep.
then causes kind of some potentially some trauma within the children, and demonstrates what a negative relationship should be like and not a constructive one. So yeah.
I have a question though. I wonder, do you think that there has been some progress made in encouraging people to like put off marriage, or do you think that's more male focused, or do you think it's,
Or
I mean,
not
obviously you still
necessarily
have a
like
ways
put
to
off,
go,
but
but I
like,
would, or because I feel like it's kind of more of a generational thing versus
oh yeah,
putting the emphasis more just on females.
Yeah, so I think generationally we're definitely evolving. We're heading into the right direction, but the shame and the social stigma put upon the female singlehood, I don't think it's getting any better.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So that I think has a longer way to go, as opposed to marriage being kind of like, oh, it's a life option, right? More and more people are registering that as like, oh, like I don't feel that much pressure to do it, right?
Mhm.
that's
But
interesting.
how women register, how young women register it, right? I think that concerns me a lot more.
Why do you think that kind of like awkward like lag exists despite the fact that you kind of see that progression but like not within like in the individual? Do you think it's just because
Patriarchy.
patriarchy, despite the fact that like one part of it has been kind of semi not really dismantled in terms of like encouraging to have an individual life, like it still hasn't fully developed into what it should be, I guess.
Yeah, so I think about social problems that have come to our fore, and it has to be a significant enough problem for the men for it to be a social problem,
Okay.
right? So a high divorce rate is a problem for the quote unquote humanity. So meaning men were included in that problem, right? So men were being impacted by that problem. So yeah, people started thinking about marriage in a different way. But that still hasn't evolved to a point where like, no, what's going on with the women, right? Like why are women getting into this relationship, right? It's to me that's a sign of patriarchy, right? Like one problem getting resolved a little bit more quickly than the other problem being a lot more gendered. That to me is sexism,
Right.
right?
Addressing the general versus the more
Exactly.
specific
Individual.
situation first. Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Can you want to get into today's?
Okay, so there's kind of like two aspects to this. So first, how has today's culture been complacent to disrespectful male behavior? Because it's it's just the norm. So I was watching a video. Bella and I were talking a lot about it. But it's by the actor. Oh my god, his name completely. Oh
Oh,
my goodness, he plays Raphael in Jane the Virgin. Justin Baldoni.
oh yeah.
And he basically has a segment where he did a TED talk, of course, but he talks about the concept of man enough and what it means to be man enough. And so he gets a bunch of males around and they have dinner and they talk about different concepts that are not typically brought up in the male space. I mean, I don't know, but that's what they say. And so one of the ones that I watched recently, I watched it last night, was about the Me Too movement. And we'll get a little bit into that later. But he was interviewing a bunch of different women. And one female said, she goes, like, females just kind of expect that sometime in their lifetime they'll get raped. And when she said that, at first I was like, whoa. But then I was like, honestly, like, yeah, like, I mean, this sounds really bad to say, but it's just true. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it happens because it's just the cultural norm. So, and he was like, whoa. And it's just something that they don't have to think about. But for females, that's just is because that's just the culture that we grew up in.
Again, on TikTok, you see girls constantly sharing videos on different techniques to defend yourself in parking lots and bathrooms. So on your way, like different tactics that these predators are now using. And I don't know, I think for me, I'm a person that is kind of been conditioned to kind of always be prepared, kind of Girl Scout model. I grew up that way. But I guess now it's kind of developed into more of a, I need to make sure I'm prepared for that situation mentally, physically, everything. And so then that anxiety that I would imagine this happen is something that's kind of prevalent within all girls, whether they like to talk about it or recognize it or not. That kind of anxiety that goes along with being prepared and that tension that you hold up within yourself when you're just in doing simple day tasks is insane. Like, so it's interesting to see, and it's in part because of a statistic that we all know. What is it, like 1 in 5, I believe, or is it? It's like 1 in 4 or 5 or 6. Is it 5 or 4?
1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men.
Yeah.
For sexual assault,
Yeah.
it's 1 in every 3.
Oh, is it 1 in every 3? Okay. Yeah. I knew it was like somewhere within like that like low range of like
a lot.
The fear of like that could be me and the tension that arises, and then like I don't know, that's like a lot of fear to have because of how traumatizing the situation is. And we're both in college, and most colleges, if not all, have like confession pages, and some even have like confessions pages specific to like highlighting different people on campus that, you know, something has had or they have done something to someone. So they like anonymous like stories come in to just make people aware of, you know, just be careful. And every once in a while, at least for my school, it's like we just have a normal confessions page. Every once in a while, you'll get like a trigger warning for slide, and then you look at the rest, and it's kind of like it's a sexual assault or like what's the other one? That's like not sexual assault. It's like sexual
harassment.
Harassment. There we go. I was thinking it was an M word, and I don't know why. It'll talk about a story related to that, and I'm like, you know, from a logical standpoint, if you looked at it, you're like, well, it could be true, it could not be true. It's anonymous. Maybe it's an isolated incident. Maybe it's not. You don't know because it hasn't been. You're not, you know, following it on the news on a case or whatever. But the girl, I guess, in me, like, is like, well, it's good to know. Like, I'm thankful for that person to share that, because now I can keep an eye out and I can understand and make my adjust my life accordingly once I'm on campus or what have you. So I know that I can try to avoid that and stay safe. You know what I mean? Like, I've kind of gone on a little tangent here.
The rape culture?
Kind of, yeah, like on college campuses more specifically, I guess. But anyway.
But yeah, so how do you think that, but yeah, so how have you seen it just kind of in today's culture, just like the complacency overall from both sides? Well, primarily male side.
Yeah. So I think it starts with parenting. I think the way boys are raised inherently is that, you know, the hyper concentration on their productive labor function of a human being. So go make a lot of money, be tough, suck it up, right? Those are the type of principles that a lot of boys grow up with, internalizing that for you to be a man, these are the values that you have to live up to or like live down to. And I think those expectations are so far low for boys. And what we need to realize is when we set an expectation for a human being, they will rise up to it, but they will also sing to it, right? Mm-hmm. And the expectations are way too low for the boys. So that, right, like we basically abandon their emotions as soon as they have any feelings, they get to have any feelings. And we just sort of, right, like we care about them being rough. They care about them, you know, all these different things that have nothing to do with being a being an emotionally intelligent person. So it doesn't really surprise that a rape culture naturally emerges when they're a young adult, right? Like, yeah, I mean, because rape culture is what? Like feeling entitled to somebody else's body, as if that person is not a human person. Lack of emotional intelligence, right? Like at the core of rape culture and gender-based violence phenomenon is the empathy deficit crisis. And boys don't learn that. It's just not a natural thing for boys to learn. Empathy and collaboration and all these decent human being values. And not to say that all boys grow up like that, but the socialization is so robust for boys not to nurture empathy for themselves. So I think that's the starting point of how rape culture emerges, how boys are raised to begin with. And then when you get into the locker room, that whole thing, it's just like they talk about how much they're essentially bragging about how much lack of empathy they have, right? Like how much empathy they don't have, right? So, oh, I did this girl and I like completely, I was like, well, yeah, as if she's not a human person, right? So it's a continuation of that empathy deficit way up until, I don't know, for a lot of men, to be honest, until death, right? If you don't engage in some real introspection, right? So I think that it's, yeah, so I think the reason why I keep saying we need male allies and we need to get men to engage in introspection is because of this. Like, it started out very young, and there's no way that this type of socialization does not traumatize anybody, because you're a human person fully capable of understanding other human beings.
Mhm.
That's what differentiates us from animals. So being reduced to this animalistic function, right? That is in and of itself a traumatizing experience. So when men come at feminists and say like, "Oh, you're men haters," I was like, "Well, no." Like we're fighting against the anti-male implications that we should expect bad behaviors from men and boys. We don't believe that. Like, I think we're better. We believe that you guys are better than that. I think you guys are just as humans as we are. And we're mad at patriarchy for devoiding you of your humanity, right? So that's the role of the men. So I really believe that they gotta stop saying not all men, and just like really engage in some like really true self-reflection and be surprised by what you encounter, right? And unfortunately, like, there are good men who are doing that work, but there are also a lot of men who are defensive about it because it's just what they've known all their lives, right? So yeah.
I think of the common example of like the when you don't know how to handle something, like an instinct is you just grow resentment, and then that turns into anger, and that turns into violence.
Internalization.
And so yeah, exactly, internalization. So when men are trained as boys to express their emotions and to kind of be okay with that and accepting it, not just within their household, but with their friends. Because I think school is such a big influence on everyone, like your external environment outside of your house. That will also like reduce the resentment built up mixed with like the pressure and then the anger from that, which also I would say perpetuates the violence that happens.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's also you're hurting yourself when you continue to reduce yourself to that standard, because at a certain point it's like you brought a great point earlier about it really comes down to like it starts at childhood and how you're raised. If you're raised with those terms being thrown around and then you get to high school and girls and boys are throwing those words around and you hear we all want gender equality, but there's even sometimes that I'll be frank, I'll say like, oh, like just toughen up, or like, which is kind of like a different way of saying man up, I guess, in a way, or stuff like that to people or to friends. I mean, I don't say that often because there's not situations to say that in, but there will be points where like you might catch yourself saying that. It's like, well, how much am I reinforcing it into them that they have to be this and continue to hurt themselves and others as well, and just engage in destructive behaviors and, you know, ideologies of themselves. So it's like recognizing when in high school, like, yes, at that point, you know, they kind of are themselves, or they're not themselves, but they can choose no longer to adopt that and change and not be a part of it. But it can be very difficult with social pressures and people still telling you, oh, like man up when you're on like sports team and you're like, maybe you're dying after running laps and you're like, oh, man up, or like, you know, it's just recognize within yourself as a female, you know, hey, maybe you may be contributing to the problem that exists inadvertently. And that's, you know, it's not okay, but it's okay to recognize that, and okay to recognize, well, maybe I do also need to help reduce that as best as I can. Outside of that, it's kind of out of your control. The best you can do is raise your child to not be afraid of showing those emotions as a child, and not tell them that's not okay to show any feminine like qualities, quote unquote, you know, of being emotional or like liking femme things. Like that's as much as you can do in terms of like contributing to the problem at a young age, I guess, or when they are at a young age. But outside of that, you just have to provide, I guess, resources or what have you to help them help themselves, because you can't do that. You just can't do that. You're not there for them. You're not their therapist. I'm sorry, but you're not. Yeah. We like to think we are, and we like to think we know everything about men and that there's these simple creatures, but we are not. Right. We can't dictate them. And this is something that if you guys want to look up outside of this, I shared with Kenya earlier. It came up on my like explore page on YouTube one day when I had logged in. It was by the Jubilee YouTube account. You know, they do like those social conversations or whatever about like tons of different things. It was something about like men talking about sex, and it was, you know, they got to
clarify straight men.
What?
Straight men.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. And
it was, they got a bunch of men together and then interviewed them separately on the same questions. And it was interesting to hear the responses. As you know, some of the questions were like silly, and the other ones were had to deal with more of sexual assault or respect and things like that. To hear their answers, and one guy, I appreciated his candidness about this. They asked about had they ever forced themselves upon someone or something of that extent.
Yeah.
And he was like, everyone else pretty much said, I haven't put myself ever in that position because I don't believe. But he was like, you know what? This is something incredibly hard for me, but I have once, yeah. And I didn't realize it at the time because she had not said no, which is what we keep telling boys, no means no. And that's that. That's what signifies someone doesn't want to do it. When in reality, it's a lot more layers to that. You can see that someone might not want to engage in such relations in body language and different things. And so he didn't recognize the body language because he had just been taught the no means no place and kind of nothing further than that. And so he was talking about how much kind of resentment he felt towards himself after, and reflection on that experience, and how he realized after, when the girl had talked to him and told him that she actually was not entirely comfortable with going all the way that day, but because she didn't vocalize it, he didn't, by saying no, he didn't recognize it until after. And so since then, he said he's obviously changed, and it's kind of really stuck with him since. But it kind of goes back to when you're raising your kids and how you do it, making sure and addressing that, you know, it's not just no. That means no. You have to look at a bunch like of different things that might be small, but can be pretty clear when it comes. If they're like a little more tense or something like that, indications are no, no, no. They're just different ways. But anyway, look into that video if you want to see kind of a male perspective of different like questions related to that. It was really interesting to see because some of the answers I was surprised about. Some of them were about we'll get into this a little later on, but about how we as females, this is me generalizing right now because this isn't, don't necessarily realize that sometimes we may be making them uncomfortable. We too play into that and expecting them to always think about sex when they may not be. We do frankly catcall guys, and we don't talk about it, but we do. We just don't do it in the same way they do it, and so we think it's acceptable to be like going after them or what have you. For those of us that are bolder, some of us may not be that bold, but we may be kind of expecting. And one guy in this video specifically said that this girl kept putting himself on her to the point where he ended up being unfortunately raped because of it. And she hadn't recognized, despite the fact that he kept saying no. I think it just came down to the fact that we also, as women, think that guys, we have reduced them to the point where, and this plays kind of into the patriarchal pressures, to just wanting people that just want sex and are kind of like animalistic, like you said. And that's kind of all that they want. When, we have to recognize they don't always think about that. And we have to recognize those signs too. So we'll get into that a little later, but it's a two-way street that we don't always recognize. But that's a good video to look and start those conversations within your own household or friend group. Anyway, want to get into...
Wait, Evelyn, you seemed like you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah.
Earlier.
Talk away.
No, yeah. I mean, so I guess one thing that I wanted to like say to Gen Z, for example, is I guess I should have said this a lot earlier, but don't put anybody on a pedestal, right? That includes me, right?
Yeah.
Just because I have studied, just because I have a little bit more experience, a little bit more education than you, that doesn't make me an ultimate source of all knowledge, right? I'm just here to support women, especially like young women growing up, having struggles that I've gone through, that I know systematically a lot of young women go through. So that being said, the reason why I said that is because so talking about consent, we talked about, no means no, and it's very complex. The no can come from very like other ways other than verbally expressing a no. So I understand that, and I think I think the onus to make sure that she is fully consenting falls on the man, given the social position of the two genders. I also think the effort also needs to put into female sexual empowerment. So if no means no, yes means yes, right? So we need to get to a point where a woman is comfortable saying no, right? She needs to know that she is able to say no.
Right.
And when she says no and the other person that starts attacking her, she needs to have gone to the self-defense classes, right? To be able to fully defend herself, right? And she's gotta know that she's entitled to invigorating, really joyful sex, right? So that means like if he's making you feel uncomfortable, if he chokes you without your consent, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a very unfortunate female experience, right? So I guess what I really wanted to highlight is there is a difference in a way that a man talks about a bad sex and a woman talks about bad sex, right? When a man talks about a bad sex, it's more like it was a boring experience. When a woman talks about it, there's some type of pain and physical pain involved. Like her discomfort, not having been fully heard in a bedroom, So for me, that's okay. Like, we need to educate men what consent means. And if she's not inviting you, and if she's not fully consenting, oh, she's like, oh yes, like, give me some of that, right? That's, you gotta, are you like, if she's not doing that, there's a problem in the bedroom, right? And address it. Like, we have to educate men with that, but we also like have to educate women and say, you need to be powerful in the boardroom, but you also need to be powerful in the bedroom, right? That doesn't mean that you have to that doesn't mean that you have to shy away from playing a submissive role to a man in a bed, but also like, insist that you have orgasm, right? Like, insist that you have comfortable sex.
Mhm.
Like, the fact that this notion that sex is painful is a really messed up, like, misguided notion, right? So I think sex education, comprehensive sex education, needs to happen for the next
Absolutely.
generation, right? For all of this to be a dialogue and a full discussion, so no girl has to go through a really messed up experience of like, oh, like, I lost my virginity and that was really painful. I said, what do you mean, right? Like, why was that painful, right? What the hell, right? It's like, right? So like, when you brought up consent, that triggered like a chain of thought. It's like, I want to,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
It's-
also,
you
I
brought
would
up a
say,
great point. Sorry. Ugh.
I was just gonna say, like, also stressing the fact that it's continuous. Like, consent needs to be continuous throughout the whole time. It's not just like from the very
And
beginning and like, okay, you said
for clarification,
yes
verbal,
to everything.
because that makes it even more clear. Once you're uncomfortable, say you're uncomfortable. And that comes from, you touched up on a great point, kind of self-advocacy, and that goes into kind of emotional intelligence, which you touched on earlier. We as female, and this is why female empowerment is so important, especially right now. It's so important to have a strong emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence, has part of it is empathy, but another part of it is self-awareness, and being self-aware of yourself and how you feel is incredibly important to then get to the point where you're comfortable and confident enough to have your self-advocacy and things like that, and stand up for yourself when you feel like, you know what, this is not it. But then you brought into the conversation about like, again, consent. Consent is one of those words that, it's pretty basic, but at the same time, at least in today's culture, when you apply it to this situation that surrounds gender-based trauma and violence, it gets very messy very quickly, because consent for people can mean very different things, which is unfortunate. It's because part of it has to do with the fact that we don't teach consent cohesively and everything across all places, and we don't have a sex ed that is comprehensive and is
Good.
in high schools and in middle schools, maybe, at least in the States. I can't speak for other countries, but we don't. And so that's something that will probably become more uniform as, education is brought upon and people are able to understand what those body language signals, and also understanding, you as a female, if you engage in that, are you asking him to consent, or are you just expecting, or are you expecting him to ask you for consent? You should both be asking each other for consent. Make sure and check up on each other. Be like, are you okay with this? Because, a lot of guys, this brought me back again to a point in this video where when that conversation happened, consent was brought up, and if they were like, has a girl, because it was after this guy that talked about how he was not asked for consent, the girl kept going off on him, which, may not be as, it's an issue, but it's not as, a 1 in 3 type statistic. I think Kenya was talking to me earlier and said it was like a 1 in 6, I think. Anyway, he was like, have you been ever asked by a female or, a partner for consent by them? And he was like, you know what? Like, no, I've never been asked if I was okay with doing it, which, goes back to assuming that all men want that interaction. So just ask for consent both ways, just to be safe,
Yeah, and that being said, I think, like, and I really want this to like be included in the podcast, because I think this is where I personally get stuck, like intellectually get stuck, because I really believe in female sexual empowerment, meaning
Yeah.
that she needs to know like what makes her feel good in a bedroom, and she needs to be able to fully speak that. That
Mhm.
said, the reality is a lot of women get into a very dangerous situation where that even if she has the full self-advocacy skills and the self-knowledge, she doesn't get to speak about that because it's dangerous. Like if you talk about it,
Right.
you're, you know, you encounter physical danger, right? So it's like, well, yeah, like we put all this effort in, and then, you know, like so there's something more that needs to happen, right, to make sure that when, you know, it doesn't, because the downside of female sexual empowerment and educating women about sex and their body, the downside of it is it can easily bleed into victim blaming, right? So we
Yeah,
educate,
like, oh, she wanted it. That's what
right? So
I've heard
so
that argument before. I was like,
yeah, so where, like, did she say that it was making her uncomfortable, right? Right? So like I get intellectually stuck with that, because
yeah,
the spirit of female sexual empowerment is the furthest thing from victim blaming, right? Um, so yeah, so if anybody is listening to this and like have ideas about this, feel free to
yeah. Talk about, because I would also like to know, because um, obviously with the age of technology, a lot of things have been talked about, and particularly with female sexual empowerment, and more so with I don't know if there's a more proper term to use, but sex workers, which
Be careful.
there's a lot of variables that go into doing that. I don't do you, I don't really care. Um, but you know, sometimes it could be because that's the only way they're able to make money if they don't have like whatever. And so
Yep.
you have to recognize that. And you know, I see it particularly in terms of them, this whole argument of one side is they're empowered and they are, you know, in control. But and the other side is that it's, well, with women, there's always in the back of our mind the threat of violence
Yep.
from a male counterpart. Always,
Yep.
especially in a partner situation, because a lot of the violence that happens is from a partner. Like that's the majority out of everything. And so, you know, in this instance for sex workers, people, well, this is more of a progressive view that, you know, that's empowerment, uh, female empowerment for the people that are in it because they want to do it, not because of other reasons. Uh, on the other hand, it's when someone does take advantage of them because they think that female empowerment in that situation equals wanting to do everything and takes advantage and threats with violence, then they get back to, oh, it was her fault. And in our legal system, it makes it like her fault because we have it in a situation where it is illegal and, oh, she must have wanted it. Like, no, she did not want that. She might have wanted something else or something out of it, but she did not want that. You know, it's a tricky argument because I've been seeing both sides of the perspective, and it's kind of making me like go back and forth like kind of a tug of war, because it is one of those things that's kind of like more of an individual case by case situation. But yeah, I agree with you. It's one of those that I have a hard time putting a position on, I guess. I don't know. It's an interesting argument on both sides. It's hard to kind of differentiate. I guess the lines blur sometimes, but at least I'm talking argument wise. I'm not talking about when they like the male starts or the female, whichever it may be in the situation, starts taking over and doing things that they don't want. But yeah.
I want to do one more thing. So for food incorporation, so obviously we focus on food justice a lot. I'm interested in your perspective on body image pressures from men to men, from men to women, from women to men, from like just all
The
parties
whole
involved.
shebang.
Yeah. I think that's a can of worms. I think that's a whole different, yeah. Um,
Yeah, it's something so hard to kind of simplify and condense into such a short period of time.
no, it's not that, but it's a very, yeah, because that's, I think the way we look at bodies, female bodies, is a source of gender-based violence and,
Yeah.
the gender discrimination. So we talked about period. We talked about earlier, how female bodies are considered very inconvenient, right? So for women to make sure that we're, in this inconvenient body, we do everything we can to make this as pleasing as possible, right? So we go through this sculpting process and all these different, self-torturing process to make sure that our body is presented in a way that is not problematic, that is socially acceptable, right? So I'm all for women, losing weight, having healthy diet, having a healthy lifestyle, but also I'm very aware of the fact that, a lot of women go through eating disorder, right? And the vast majority of eating disorder patients are women, right? And it's this, I don't think we touched on this, but when boys grow up, they do not internalize shame, they externalize it, right? So that's why they turn out to be abusers and harassers.
Yeah.
They don't internalize the pain. It's you have to act out on it. Whereas women, girls, we internalize our pain. That's why we constitute majority of the people with quote unquote mental health problems, right? So quote unquote issues, right? So like we self-harm, we engage in all these like self-destructive behaviors. And I think eating disorder is just one way of self-harm, right? So talking about body image pressure, I think the pressure that young girls deal with about their bodies is just way too much for a person, right? Like you go through puberty, your body starts changing and the society tells you that it's very shameful and it's problematic and inconvenient and you're causing trouble for other people. And then on top of it, you have to make sure that your body is as pleasing as possible. It's just a lot of, it's very stressful, right? And so these girls develop anxiety disorder and all these different disorders. And now like they become, quote unquote women with issues. And they like, it's just, like it's a manufacturing process for quote unquote problematic women, right? And then later you call these women like, oh, like women with daddy issues or like women with, eating disorder. Like it's just, right? Well, no, like these women are products of patriarchy, and these women are victims of patriarchy, like at least in my opinion, right? Like according to my studies. So it's right. So I think it's just the commodification of female bodies in the media, right? And the hypersexualization of female bodies in the media. Like I have a huge problem with, just, a lot of movies and a lot of shows just
comes from like the male gaze and male directors and what they think that kind of what they portray needing to be.
Right. And the extension of that is, why do you blur out female nipples? Right. It's just a
but
body,
not males
body. Right. It's just a body. But why do you, right? Because it's that's somehow sexual. Right.
Yeah.
And women should be wearing bras. And it's just, for women, it's the pressure to have a body that is quote unquote perfect is endless. I think that's what we wake up to every day. So the relationship with this one mother came to my TikTok live and asked, how, like, what should I tell my daughter? Like, I have a daughter, and how can I help her not internalize misogyny? And my answer automatically is help her develop a healthy relationship with her body, right? That means like you have full ownership over your body. If somebody touches you in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, say something, right? Or alert the mother, or like alert me, like alert any adult, right? Like, and utilize your resources, but also have a really good relationship with your body, right? Like take care, like just really listen to it, right? Like what makes your body feel good, right? Like what like when you go out for a run, like it like you sweat a lot, and like it feels good. Like it take a note of it, right? So it's like it's that process, and I think that whole process is non-existent for a lot of young girls, and that really I think that's very concerning for
You
this.
just unlocked
That's so
a
good.
whole new understanding or level of understanding. I feel like I always understood, like on a basic level, like societal pressures on women to like look a certain way. Everyone's kind of understood that, but I like never. I don't know. It was something you said like that really made me have like, oh my gosh, like there's another layer like behind that layer to it, and made everything click more. I was like, whoa, okay.
And this is also like your relationship with your body is so important, because your body is constantly under attack, right, by the society. Like you fear for the violence, so the violation of your body, right? And the society is basically telling you to sculpt your body, so it's constantly under attack. So if you don't have a good relationship with your body, you're going to internalize that
Yeah.
shame and pain, and develop something that is really unhealthy and toxic. So for me, that's why we need comprehensive sex education, right? You're gonna have to know what gives you pleasure. You can't, and not knowing that, right, gets you into, and this is a toxic cycle. So many successful women, like I shouldn't say so many, but way too many successful women get into abusive relationships because, quote unquote, sex, right? She didn't learn how to unlock the pleasure for herself, and like a male does it for her, and that gets into the whole toxic dynamic, right? I think that story should not exist at all, right? I'm not saying this is like a structural problem, but even those stories that, one story for me is enough for like that to be like alarming, right? Because that's a statement of, okay, like what is women's relationship to pleasure, especially bodily pleasure, right? So it's like, well, yeah, like I want sex education to teach young girls that there is not, there's not one type of sex that's going to give you pleasure. Penetrative sex is not the only sex, right? There are other ways you can get pleasure for yourself, and there is no shame in that, right? And I think that's the whole thing about, so when we talk about female body, it's just that's like that. I think that's unlocking the whole, whole, just like a lot of bullshit, from patriarchy, because in the end, like, it's patriarchy is all about controlling women and women's bodies, right? So it's so in short, I think body image issue, like it's for young women, I think it's way too much. I think it's way too much pressure. I think way too much stress for young people to go through and handle.
Yeah, so good. I want to be respectful of your time, or respectful of your time. So, do you have any final words? And then you can also just shout out all of your stuff.
Yeah, so I see here, just gender equality is not a women's issue. It's a human issue. It affects us all. It's by Anonymous.
Mhm.
Where'd you get this quote?
It's just like one of those like quotes. Like I just went on the page and I tried to find a quote that's like resembles of what we're talking. So I just kind of Googled gender equality quotes.
Yeah. So yeah. I guess so. I mean, I don't think this comes as a surprise, but I would take an issue with that quote, right? Because I would argue that gender equality is a man's issue, right? And I don't think anybody should be apologizing for that. And when we take gender out of gender-based violence, when we take gender out of all these different problems, it's like saying police brutality in America is not a race issue.
Yeah,
well, it is a race issue, right? And we're going to have to talk about racial divide, right? So it's, I understand that women's rights are human rights, but I take issue with anybody saying that gender violence is a human issue. Because it is a men's issue. It's men doing bad things to women.
Right. It's invalidating the woman experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess that was one thing. And I think another thing that I wanted to say was you both are very special people. Like I can already tell. Just the amount of investment that you are showing as young women to show up to issues like this and take initiative voluntarily and spend this much time and spend this much brain space and continuing to commit yourself to this type of political and social cause. I think that's what's going to make you powerful. And I hope that one day, and this is to any woman and like any young women, um, I modeled and I was in the beauty industry, like all these, I have all these like different experiences. And one thing that I realized is like what makes me powerful isn't beauty, is what pisses me off. Right. And I hope I imagine that, by studying all of this and getting exposing yourself to these issues, that you're already at some level very pissed. And I congratulate you on that, because I think that's a huge accomplishment for women to have access to your anger. And I'm really moved by your effort and spending time with you and hearing your thought process and listening to how you are viewing the world and the willingness that you have to challenge how you are viewing the world and how you are perceiving problems. I think you are a great addition to the changing world and the changing tide. And I'm here to support you in that. And I fully encourage you to continue on in your journey. You both are very special people, and I can already tell. And I've met a lot of people. I've met a lot of young people too. So that's, I think, I really wanted to say that as my parting words. But also for like anybody who is watching, not watching, who has tuned in and who has been listening. It's one, if anything, intersectional feminism has really taught me that everyone is linked. So your problem is my problem. If you're having a gender-based violence issue or body issue, I obviously didn't do a good job enough as a full-grown adult to change the culture that has impacted you this severely. So understanding the kind of civic duty and developing more commitment. If you are struggling or if you are grappling with any of these issues, or if you're just starting to question yourself and how you have been raised or how you have grown up internalizing all this bullshit, I encourage you to keep on questioning the rules of this game that is so stacked against you, and reach out for support. Just keep on, getting more content, like educating yourself. And if you have trouble, find people, like me, and there are other great content creators out there, and make an effort to connect with them. And finally, have a mentor. We need it, especially if you're a woman of color. Find a mentor, like who can tell you, if you're passionate about gender studies, you're going to have to know what jobs in the space are available, like what kind of studies that you can do. If you can't commit to gender studies, I wasn't committed to gender studies, right? And there are other different areas, like there are other ways you can get the similar education and still contribute to gender equality, right? So there are so many women who came before us that were creative enough, that navigated this space. So connect with those women and really make an effort and make a commitment to connecting with these women. They are there to help you. And those women fought those fights so we don't have to, right? So to make this a little bit easier for us. So I can tell that you guys are going to make a positive change. And I really congratulate you on that. And keep on. Yeah. So
Thank you so much.
yeah, that would be my parting words. And if we were together in the same room, I would give you a big hug. But since that is not possible, I'm just gonna bump.
Yeah.
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 Thank you. Do you want, you can shout out your TikTok, your blog, everything.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I am on TikTok as Herspective. And my blog is evelynco.com. But I'm going to change this to Herspective Feminist in the very near future. I'm also thinking about getting a YouTube channel. My IG is at Herspective_Evelyn. And if my content or I can be of support in any way for anyone who is struggling with gender issues and intersectional feminism, I am here to support you. I'm here to empower you. And I hope whatever is stressing you out as a young woman or as a young dude, that my content is helpful in you navigating whatever you're going through. And thank you so much for having me. This was a
No, thank
privilege
you.
meeting you guys.
I hope that our conversation was, I guess, productive, more as productive as it was on our end for you. I don't know. And everyone that's listening, definitely go follow her and stuff like that. Like I said before, like I have always considered myself a feminist, but I mean, we are young girls, so we haven't, fully been able to be seen everything, and we have had the majority of our lives these pressures put upon us from society. And so even if you think you know everything, I'm telling you, thank you to you again. Your account has helped a lot in like inadvertently like identifying wording issues and perspectives through those wording issues for myself, and I'm sure for everyone, a lot of other people are following you, like I said earlier. Yeah, it's helped a lot with identifying, well, hey, let's take a step back here. Maybe we need to rethink this issue that I had already, deemed an answer in my head of, and rethink it and kind of change where I'm at. So that was really helpful in like tweaking what is, reality and what has been placed upon me, and trying to differentiate the two. And I thank you so much for that and joining us and actually wanting to come on and help have a conversation and putting up with our, sometimes not completely there yet point of views, and kind of guiding us to a place to understand it, what it really is at its core. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and don't ever apologize. You were great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Let me pause. So thank you so much to Evelyn. That was so good. And just touching back on the inspirational quote. So the quote was, "Gender equality is not a woman's issue. It's a human issue. It affects us all." Her perspective that she gave was just so interesting. Like I've never, it was, right? Because I feel like with every other episode, everyone's like, wow, that quote is so good. But it just shows you
no one ever
like the one-sided perspective that I have, that everyone has, and that I have while I'm finding the quote. So I really appreciate her perspective on that. And now
I mentioned it, I probably mentioned it literally every single time I made a point throughout this podcast, that about her TikToks and how it brought a completely different side to it that I had never assumed, even though I feel like, or a different level of what I had already known, I guess is the better way to point it out. I feel like as a girl, or as a feminist and a girl, you have a baseline views and values. And her videos, even though I thought I was rather aligned, I guess, or inherently viewed everything in a more feminist nature, her videos unlocked another like level to the layer, to the complex nature of the patriarchy and how it affects everything, that kind of brought to light. And this quote is just another example of I did not recognize that whatsoever. It seemed like a perfectly fine quote, like Kenya said. And I think when she said that, it kind of like clicked, like it slowly clicked and like eventually locked. Like, you're like, wait a minute, you're right. Like, it kind of, the way it's presented is in a way where if you imagine male, female, and gender for this situation, we won't be talking about non-binary. Anyway, as 3 points making a triangle. The way this quote portrays it and how I guess we all really thought about it, to be honest, was that the female and gender point are connected by a line. The male and gender point is connected by a line, but the female and male is not connected by a line. So it doesn't make a connected like circuit type thing where they all intertwine. It's kind of a feeding point, but never, working together type thing, which was really, I don't know, that like unlocked again another aha moment in me, which was just great. Always love for a perspective change.
Nice eureka moment.
Yeah, the next eureka moment.
Yeah, and one last thing, two more things, but I think, there's no way we can always progress. It's like she said, it's going to take forever to get there. But I think just the way that we can actively slowly start to get there in our own lives is to just start having conversations and really stress empathetic yet accountability, or really stress empathy while also maintaining accountability in those conversations. And it has to happen between female to female, between female to male, between male to male. Like, it has to involve everyone, and they all just need to have different conversations, because the different perspectives. Like, I simply, because I'm a female, cannot tell a male what is right or what is wrong, because it's just my perspective. You know what I mean? And so
you can tell them how to feel without asking. I think I agree.
Yeah.
Like, in those conversations that we need to be having, we need to be candid and have it in a place where it's not putting shame on the other person or
right.
Like, sitting down and having those conversations, intentionally knowing that, this person's perspective may be what is more restrictive on certain things. And that could be because they didn't have that eureka moment, They weren't explained, it wasn't explained, or they didn't see it in a way that made it click in their head and change their perspective a little. And that's okay. We saw today throughout the podcast,
it should happen. It needs to happen.
But you need to understand that and go into conversations with a malleable perspective where it's okay to change it slightly and recognize it, and recognize that your perspective is not going to be automatically that the quote, for example, we mentioned, there's something wrong with it. That's not going to be your immediate perspective. So don't feel pressured for it to be like that. That might only come with new experience, new people in your life. And, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Everyone's at their own pace in life.
What?
Everyone's at their own pace in life.
True. And we're all just trying to make it. Lastly, before Bella promotes, we just want to send out a quick shout out. Thank you to Alicia. I know we're gonna get sentimental. I feel like Alicia is one of the first people that has kind of allowed that space for me to truly like step up in a leadership role, whether like just with simple, like, not leadership role as in terms of outside people, but in terms of myself, and to really
with empowerment.
Empowering myself, and to gaining that confidence, and to also being confident enough to be receptive to learning information, and then also being confident enough to share that information that I have learned. And so therefore I can learn more information, and just to kind of create that dialogue. So I know she's definitely been a very big influence in both of our lives. So Alicia, thank you. We love
Yes.
you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, she has definitely provided Kenny and I with a platform very clearly with this podcast. And lets us
Not
kind of
deserved, but
express our
thankful.
opinions and our thought process. And she helps us with constructive criticism in a non-judgmental way, and but at the same time empowers us so that we can change the world.
Accountability and empathy.
She's a perfect
That would be a
example
great TED Talk. Oh my goodness, I need to store that.
So just like Evelyn said, obviously, unfortunately, Alicia and Evelyn can't be that female mentor for everybody. Sorry.
Sorry.
But look for those people in your life. It may take you a bit to find that person. But once you find them, they're very helpful. And you may end up becoming someone else's mentor. So keep your minds open and willing for that kind of mindset. So again, thank you, Alicia, for putting up with us in our
oh my God, just us
ways,
just everything that encompasses us,
our very opinionated ways. So you can find us if you want to follow us or continue listening or donate to us on our website at www.nourishmysoul.org. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube. Just search up Nourish My Soul. That's where our podcast will be alongside Alicia's podcast. She has a couple of different ones for the days of the week. So like Mindful Mondays. That may be actually a way you can indirectly get her as a mentor. You can find us on our Instagram accounts. You can find Nourish My Soul at nourish.my.soul. And you can find From the Ground Up, which is our teen group, at From, without the O, Ground Up. You can email Alicia even, surprise, surprise, at alicia@nourishmysoul.org. And Alicia is spelled Alicia. And finally, you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. To name a few would be Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public. Peace out, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, non-binary Scouts, all Scouts, alien Scouts, everybody.
Oh my God.
Going crazy today.